Sarah Chin sat quietly in seat 12C, looking like any other passenger on Flight 447. The Boeing 777 cruised smoothly at 31,000 feet through clear blue skies. She wore simple clothes, dark jeans, and a plain sweater, her black hair tied back in a neat ponytail. To everyone around her, she was just another business traveler heading to Denver. The man in seat 12A talked loudly about his sales meeting. "Yeah, boring conference stuff," he said into his phone. "I'll close that deal when I get back Thursday." The elderly woman in 12B knitted quietly, occasionally asking Sarah polite questions about her trip. "Just business," Sarah replied with a smile, keeping her answers short and simple. Sarah held a paperback book, but wasn't really reading it. Her trained eyes moved constantly, counting passengers, checking exit doors, watching the flight attendants, old habits from a life she kept hidden. Nobody on this plane knew that Sarah Chin had once been Major Sarah Chin, one of the Air Force's best fighter pilots. Nobody knew she had flown F-22 Raptors on classified missions, or that she later worked for military intelligence, analyzing enemy aircraft and combat tactics. For the past 3 years, Sarah had worked as a civilian consultant, her military background buried in classified files. Today she was traveling to Denver for what seemed like a routine defense contractor meeting, just another day in her quiet new life. The flight attendant, Jenny, walked down the aisle with her drink cart. "What can I get you?" she asked cheerfully. "Just water, please," Sarah replied. "Traveling for work?" Jenny made small talk. "Yes, consulting," Sarah answered, giving no details. Jenny smiled and moved on to the next passenger. In the cockpit, Captain Mike Torres and his co-pilot, David Kim, checked their instruments. Torres had been flying commercial jets for 20 years, Kim was younger but experienced. "Beautiful day for flying," Torres said, looking at the clear skies ahead. "We'll arrive in Denver 20 minutes early. Everything's routine and peaceful." Sarah tried to focus on her book but couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't say what. Her military training had taught her to trust these instincts. She looked around the cabin again. Families chatting, business travelers working on laptops, a teenager playing video games while his mother told him to turn it down. Everything looked normal. Then Sarah felt it, a slight vibration in the plane's structure. Most passengers wouldn't have noticed it, but her trained senses picked up the subtle change. She looked out the small window but saw only empty sky and distant clouds. Suddenly, the plane's intercom crackled to life. Captain Torres's voice came through, tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're experiencing some unusual air traffic in our area. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened while we work with air traffic control." Sarah's blood ran cold. Unusual air traffic at 31,000 feet could only mean one thing: military aircraft. But why would fighter jets be near a commercial flight path? The businessman in 12A looked annoyed. "Great. Probably some Air Force training exercise making us late," he grumbled. The elderly woman kept knitting, unconcerned. Other passengers murmured among themselves, mostly worried about flight delays. Sarah unbuckled her seat belt and stood up, ignoring the captain's announcement. She walked calmly toward the front of the plane, her mind racing through possibilities. If military aircraft were in the area, there had to be a reason, and if that reason involved a threat to this civilian plane, she might be the only person aboard with the knowledge to help. Jenny approached her. "Ma'am," the captain asked. "Everyone to remain seated," she said politely. "I need to speak with the captain," Sarah replied quietly. "It's about the air traffic situation." Jenny looked confused. "Are you in aviation?" Sarah paused. "Something like that. It's important." Before Jenny could respond, the plane suddenly banked hard to the left. Passengers cried out in alarm as drinks spilled and carry-on bags shifted in the overhead compartments. Sarah grabbed a seat back to steady herself, her pilot instincts immediately analyzing the maneuver. That wasn't a normal course correction, that was an evasive turn. The intercom crackled again, and this time Captain Torres sounded genuinely worried. "Flight attendants, please prepare for possible turbulence and ensure all passengers are secured." The code words were clear to Sarah. They were in real trouble. Sarah pushed forward toward the cockpit, ignoring Jenny's protests. She could hear other passengers starting to panic behind her. "What's going on?" Someone shouted. Why are we turning so hard? Another voice demanded. Sarah reached the cockpit door and knocked firmly. Captain, I need to speak with you. It's about the aircraft in your vicinity. Through the small window, she could see Torres and Kim frantically working their radios and checking instruments. The door opened, and Torres looked out, his face pale with stress. Ma'am, please return to your seat. We're dealing with a situation here. What kind of aircraft is tracking you? Sarah asked quietly. Torres stared at her in surprise. How do you know about? Who are you? Someone who can help, Sarah said. Let me in. Torres hesitated, then opened the cockpit door wider. Sarah stepped inside and immediately saw what had the pilots so frightened. On the radar screen, a fast-moving blip was approaching their position at incredible speed. It appeared 10 minutes ago, Torres explained. Denver Control says it's not one of theirs. It's not responding to radio calls, and it's closing fast. Kim pointed at the radar. Look at that speed. Over Mach 2. No commercial aircraft can do that. Sarah studied the display with expert eyes. The approaching aircraft's speed and flight pattern told her everything she needed to know. That's a fighter jet, she said quietly, and based on its approach vector, it's not friendly. Both pilots stared at her. How can you possibly know that? Torres demanded. Sarah took a deep breath. Her cover was about to be blown, but people's lives were at stake. Because I used to fly jets like that one. I'm a former Air Force fighter pilot and intelligence officer, and right now that aircraft is setting up for an attack run on this plane. The cockpit fell silent except for the hum of engines and crackling radio static. Torres and Kim looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. You're military? Kim asked. Sarah nodded. Retired Major Sarah Chin, F-22 pilot, 127th Fighter Wing. Later, military intelligence, analyzing enemy aircraft capabilities. Torres grabbed her arm. Can you help us? I've got 284 passengers back there and no idea how to defend against a fighter jet. Sarah looked at the radar again. The hostile aircraft was now less than 50 miles away and closing fast. First, we need to figure out who's flying that jet and what they want. Then we start taking evasive action. Sarah took the co-pilot's radio headset. Unknown aircraft approaching United 447, this is a passenger aboard the commercial flight. Identify yourself and state your intentions. Static filled the radio for several seconds. Then a voice came through, cold, professional, with a slight accent Sarah couldn't immediately place. Commercial aircraft, alter course to heading 180 and descend to 20,000 feet. Immediately. You have 2 minutes to comply. The transmission ended abruptly. Sarah felt ice in her veins. This was no training exercise or case of mistaken identity. Someone was hijacking their plane from the air. Do we comply? Torres asked, his hand hovering over the controls. No, Sarah said firmly. If we follow their instructions, we'll be flying toward empty airspace where no one can help us. They're trying to isolate us. She studied the radar again. That aircraft is definitely military, probably an F-16 or similar. Single engine, highly maneuverable, armed with air-to-air missiles. Kim looked terrified. Missiles. They're going to shoot us down. Sarah shook her head. Not yet. If they wanted us destroyed, we'd already be gone. They want something else, probably to force us to land somewhere specific. The question is who they are and what they want. The radio crackled again. Commercial aircraft, you have 90 seconds to comply with the course change. This is your final warning. Sarah grabbed the microphone. Unknown aircraft, we are a civilian flight with 284 souls aboard. We will not alter course without proper authorization from air traffic control. Torres looked at her like she was insane. Are you trying to get us all killed? Sarah held up a hand. Trust me, we need to buy time and force them to show their hand. Right now we don't know what we're dealing with. Suddenly the plane shook violently as something streaked past the cockpit windows, close enough that they could see gray metal and military markings. It was an F-16 Fighting Falcon, Sarah realized, with no national insignia she could identify. The fighter had buzzed them at incredible speed, a classic intimidation tactic. Screams erupted from the passenger cabin as people saw the military aircraft flash past. Sarah could hear Jenny and the other flight attendants trying to calm everyone down, but panic was spreading quickly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," came Jenny's voice over the intercom. "We're working to resolve this situation." The radio exploded with chatter from Denver Control. "United 447, we show an unidentified military aircraft in your vicinity. Are you under threat?" Torres grabbed the microphone. "Denver Control, affirmative. Unknown fighter jet demanding course change. Request immediate assistance. United 447, we're scrambling Air Force interceptors from Peterson Air Force Base. Maintain current course and altitude. Help is en route." Sarah felt a surge of hope. If friendly fighters were coming, they might have a chance. But the hostile aircraft wasn't waiting. The F-16 appeared again, this time flying alongside them at a distance of maybe 200 yards. Through the cockpit window, Sarah could see the pilot clearly, helmet, oxygen mask, focused on their plane. The fighter's weapons pylons were loaded with missiles. 60 seconds, came the cold voice over the radio. "Comply, or face the consequences." Sarah studied the enemy aircraft's position and flight pattern. The pilot was skilled, maintaining perfect formation despite the massive difference in aircraft performance. This was no terrorist with basic flight training, this was a professional military pilot. "Captain, I need you to listen carefully," Sarah said to Torres. "In about 30 seconds, that F-16 is going to fire a warning shot, probably across our nose. When he does, I want you to push this plane into a steep dive, not enough to hurt passengers but enough to break his firing solution." Torres stared at her. "A dive, in a commercial airliner, at this altitude?" Sarah nodded. "Trust me, I've flown combat missions. That pilot expects us to fly straight and level like a good civilian aircraft. We need to be unpredictable." Kim pointed out the window. "He's moving into position." Sarah watched the F-16 adjusting its angle, setting up for a warning shot, following standard intercept procedure, but with deadly intent. 30 seconds expired, came the radio transmission. "You have chosen unwisely." Suddenly Sarah saw the flash of a missile launching from the fighter's wing pylon. But instead of heading toward them, it streaked across their flight path and exploded in empty air about half a mile ahead. "Now!" Sarah shouted. "Dive now!" Torres pushed the control yoke forward, and the massive Boeing 777 began descending rapidly. Passengers screamed as they felt the sudden drop, but Sarah knew it was their only chance. The F-16 pilot hadn't expected the sudden maneuver, and in the few seconds it took him to adjust, precious distance opened between the aircraft. "Level off at 28,000 feet, Sarah instructed, then start a gradual turn to the east, toward Peterson Air Force Base." Torres followed her instructions, sweat pouring down his face. "How long until those Air Force jets get here?" he asked Denver Control. "United 447, interceptors are airborne. Estimated arrival, 15 minutes. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours with a hostile fighter on their tail." The F-16 reappeared, closer now and clearly angry at their evasive action. The radio crackled with threats in accented English. "You will comply immediately, or your aircraft will be destroyed. This is not a negotiation." Sarah took the microphone again. "Unknown aircraft, identify yourself and state your authority to issue orders to civilian aircraft." She was stalling, trying to gather intelligence. Every word might provide clues about who they were dealing with. "I am authorized by powers you do not understand," came the reply. "Your aircraft carries something that belongs to us. Comply, or die." Sarah felt a chill. This wasn't about the plane itself. There was something, or someone, aboard that the attackers wanted. She turned to Torres. "Do you know anything unusual about this flight? Special cargo, VIP passengers, anything out of the ordinary?" Torres shook his head. "Standard passenger manifest. No special cargo, no government officials that I know of." But Sarah's mind was racing. If someone was targeting this specific flight, they had intelligence about the passengers or cargo. Her own presence could be coincidental, but what if it wasn't? What if someone knew exactly who was aboard? The F-16 moved closer, now flying just 100 yards off their starboard wing. Sarah could see the pilot clearly through his canopy, and something about his flight helmet looked familiar. The distinctive shape and markings were not standard NATO equipment. "Captain, I need to see your passenger manifest," Sarah said urgently. "There might be someone aboard that these people are after." Torres pointed to a clipboard, and Kim handed over the papers. Sarah scanned the names quickly. Most were ordinary American names, but several caught her attention, a few of Eastern European origin, one listed as a diplomat from a country she knew had been in recent conflict with the United States. Then she saw something that made her blood freeze. Listed in C-23A was Dr. Viktor Petrov, scientific researcher. Sarah knew that name from classified intelligence briefings. Petrov was a Russian nuclear scientist who had defected to the United States 6 months earlier, bringing with him critical information about advanced weapons programs. "That's it," Sarah whispered. "They're here for Petrov." Torres looked confused. "Who's Petrov?" Sarah pointed to the name on the manifest. "A Russian defector with nuclear weapons secrets. If they take him back, it could shift the balance of power in Eastern Europe." The radio crackled again. "You have 2 minutes to begin descent to 15,000 feet and turn toward the coordinates I will provide. Dr. Petrov will be transferred to our custody upon landing. Refuse, and everyone dies." So they knew exactly who they wanted and where he was sitting. This was a planned operation, not a random hijacking. Sarah grabbed the intercom microphone for the passenger cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Sarah Chin. I'm former military, and I'm helping the flight crew deal with our situation. We need Drive Viktor Petrov to come to the front of the aircraft immediately. This is a matter of national security." She could hear confused murmurs from the cabin, then footsteps approaching the cockpit. A man in his 60s appeared, thin, nervous, with thick glasses and graying hair. "I am Drive Petrov," he said quietly, in accented English. "They have found me." "Yes," Sarah nodded grimly. "Someone very much wants you back, Doctor. But we're not going to let that happen." Petrov's face went pale. "You do not understand. If they take me, the weapons information I carry will be catastrophic for your country." "Then we make sure they don't take you," Sarah said firmly. She turned back to the radar display. The F-16 was holding position, waiting for their response. But now she could see 2 new blips approaching from the east, the Air Force interceptors from Peterson. "Denver Control, United 447, we have identified the target aboard our aircraft. Request priority handling for protective custody upon landing." The response came immediately. "United 447, understood. You were cleared for emergency landing at Denver International. Military escort is en route." The hostile pilot had apparently heard the transmission. "Your military friends will arrive too late," came the cold voice over the radio. "Descend now, or I will destroy your aircraft and recover what I came for from the wreckage." Sarah knew they had reached the critical moment. The enemy pilot was running out of time and patience. In a few minutes, friendly fighters would arrive and his advantage would be gone. He would either have to act now or abort the mission. "Captain, he's about to make his move," Sarah warned Torres. "When I say so, I need you to put this aircraft into the most aggressive evasive maneuvers you've ever attempted. Ignore passenger comfort. Ignore the stress on the airframe. Our lives depend on it." Torres nodded grimly. "Just tell me what to do." Sarah watched the F-16 carefully. The pilot was adjusting position, moving into an attack formation. "He's lining up for a disabling shot, probably trying to damage our engines to force us down." Suddenly the fighter's nose came up, and Sarah saw the telltale flash of a missile launch. "Hard right turn, now," she shouted. Torres threw the control wheel over, and the massive airliner banked sharply. Passengers screamed as they were thrown against their seat belts. The missile streaked past their left wing, missing by less than 50 feet. Sarah felt the heat wash from its exhaust trail. "Now climb, full power." The Boeing's engines roared as Torres pulled back on the controls, fighting to gain altitude and distance from their attacker. But the F-16 was faster and more maneuverable. It swung around behind them, setting up for another attack. "He's coming back," Kim warned, watching the radar. "Next shot won't be a miss," Sarah said grimly. Then she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the voice of an American fighter pilot on the radio. "Unknown aircraft, this is Viper 11, United States Air Force. You were ordered to break off your attack on the civilian aircraft immediately and follow me to the nearest airfield for identification." 2 F-16s with Air Force markings appeared on either side of the hostile fighter. The enemy pilot found himself suddenly outnumbered and outgunned. For several long seconds, all 4 aircraft flew in formation while radio silence stretched unbearably. Finally, the hostile pilot spoke. "This is not over," he said simply. Then his F-16 rolled away from the formation and accelerated rapidly to the south, disappearing from radar as quickly as it had appeared. United 447, this is Viper 1-1. Threat is neutralized. You were cleared to proceed to Denver International under escort. Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. They had survived. As Captain Torres began his descent toward Denver, Sarah looked back into the passenger cabin. Dr. Petrov sat quietly in his seat, probably understanding better than anyone how close they had all come to disaster. The other passengers were shaken but safe, most still unaware of exactly what had threatened them. Jenny approached Sarah. "Ma'am, the captain asked me to thank you. He says you saved everyone aboard." Sarah shook her head. "We all did our jobs today. That's what teamwork means." But as she returned to C-12C, Sarah knew her quiet civilian life was probably over. Her cover was blown, her military background exposed. There would be debriefings, investigations, probably a return to active duty. The woman who had boarded this flight as an anonymous consultant would not be the same person who walked off it. As Flight 447 touched down safely at Denver International Airport, surrounded by military vehicles and FBI agents waiting to take drive Petrov into protective custody, Sarah Chin allowed herself a small smile. She had spent 3 years trying to be invisible, trying to blend in as just another ordinary passenger. Today she had learned that sometimes the most ordinary-looking person in C-12C might be the most extraordinary person on the plane. The fighter pilot in her had never really gone away, it had just been waiting for the moment when her country needed her most. At 31,000 feet, surrounded by innocent civilians and facing an enemy who would stop at nothing, that moment had finally come, and Sarah Chin had been ready. As the aircraft rolled to a stop and the passengers began to gather their belongings, Sarah looked out the window at the military escorts and federal agents waiting on the tarmac. Her quiet life was over, but she had no regrets. Sometimes a hero has to step out of the shadows, even if it means never being able to hide in them again.